Hey, welcome. Come on in. Good to see you. All right, guys, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the first lecture of Survey Research and Design. Very lovely to see some familiar faces. It's very nice. That's what I love about this unit in particular. I teach first year foundations and third year statistics, and it's nice to see people as they age, I guess. No, you all look just the same. So if you haven't had me before, my name is Anandin Ambikaraja, and you'll hear lots about me today. Firstly, apologies for the room. There's been some challenges with the new room booking system. You may have found that with the enrollment process, it's been challenging to find allocations for on-campus tutorials. That's because they've transitioned to a new system and the whole university has had issues with trying to find rooms. They've told me that they've resolved it for this unit. So the first tutorial, which is at 8:30 a.m. on Thursday, starting in week 2, that one is in a computer lab. So if you don't have a computer, that's a good one to be enrolled in. And if you do have a computer and you don't need to be at that time, I'd prefer if you were able to enroll in the second tutorial, which is later in the day, I think. And that's just a much larger lecture theatre that provides that. And then there's the on-campus stream, which are those tutorials, and then there's the real-time version, which is an online tutorial which runs at night. So we'll do some nighttime statistics as well there. Excellent. So that's everything there. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge country. I feel most connected to country when I'm running, and recently, as of the last 6 months, I've taken up trail running, and so I feel connected to the Ngunnawal people. I'd like to acknowledge their contributions to the land and their culture, and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. So, firstly, about me, I think many of you know who I am if you've had me in foundations, but so my name's Anandin. I'm a neuroscientist, and I've been at the University of Canberra for the last 6 years now, and my research focuses on dementia. So I look at risk factors for brain health, trying to identify what are the contributors to poor brain health as people age, and optimal brain health, and how we can modify risk factors to improve longevity and aging. And then I've also done a bit of work looking at dementia diagnostic timelines. So how long does it take for someone to get a dementia diagnosis, and what are the barriers and enablers to that? So that's some of my recent research. I love teaching, so teaching's a big part of what I do in addition to research. And I think that's pretty much enough about me. But when it comes to my teaching philosophy, which you may be familiar with if you've had me before, but largely it's one that's predicated on community and justification. And so what I mean by those two things are community in the sense of how we operate as a class. When you're asking questions, I prefer those questions to be on a discussion forum board so everyone has access to information. So if you've asked a question, it's there. I put a lot of time and effort into my responses there because it allows people to all see the answers. And justification in the sense of, I mean, it's critical in statistics because justification is sort of the critical thinking skill we try to foster in university, and so that's a key tenet and part of my teaching philosophy. Cool, that's pretty much everything about me. There's some materials here on this website, which I'll actually be putting on the Canvas site for Survey Research and Design. If you flick into the teaching site, you'll find that there's 4 hours of lecture materials recorded about generative AI. So if you haven't used Gen AI before, if you have used Gen AI before and you want to learn to use it better, these materials will be really useful. They cover what it is, some use cases, how it works, how to prompt effectively, and all of this will be relevant and useful for some of, well, your lab report assessment where you're able to use Gen AI for parts of it. Hey, come on. So some useful material there for you to review, and I'll pop that onto the Canvas site once this lecture is finished later today. So you may be asking yourself, why do you need to study statistics? Well, it's part of your part of your degree, which is why you're here, I'm sure. But there's hopefully some more fun reasons. It allows you to understand data. So data is just numbers without statistics. Statistics are what allow you to gather meaning from data. And so that's a core tenet of it. And from that meaning, you can make informed decisions. So you can make predictions like, should I put money into this investment fund and to have it grow? Should I engage in this behavior and will it lead to some positive outcome? So it really does allow for making informed decisions. And we see that everywhere. We see that with marketing, Coles, Woolworths, they gather as much data as possible because data is power. It allows you to make predictions about how people behave day to day. And solving real world problems, it's really critical and important for that. Improving research, of course, because without statistics, we wouldn't be able to really make sense of the data we collect in research. Career opportunities is a pretty important one in the sense that many people, when you graduate from your degree in psychology, one of the biggest skills that will be of notice for employers is your statistical expertise. And it's not really intuitive for people coming into psychology, but you're trained in statistics and methodology and design much more than other degrees, and so that's really a standout feature of the psychology program. So it actually opens up a lot of career opportunities for you, and in the ways in which the world is moving, using data to make predictions, using data to understand trends, all of that is really, really important. And what I think is one of the most important things is critical thinking skills. I've personally benefited immensely through learning statistics in terms of the way I think about the world. And hopefully through the course of this unit, you'll also develop not only similar skills, but an appreciation of how statistics can help you be a better critical thinker. And there's this great book called Calling Bullshit, The Art of Skepticism in a Data-Driven World by Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West. And it really shows how people use the facade of maths and statistics to try to convince others of arguments. And you'll see that in the news all the time. They'll say statements like 70% of people believe this or 80% of people will vote this way. And this book is how can you use your framework and understanding of statistics to critically probe those questions. And so that's really what you'll get from this unit. And statistics may seem like abstract and it may seem scary because it has like quite mathematical underpinnings, but all of it comes from real world stories and applications. And so I thought I'd tell you these two stories as an example of the application of statistics and how it came about. So you may have heard of Fisher's exact test. Don't worry if you haven't, but Fisher's exact test is used to determine if there's a significant association between two categorical variables. So you have one categorical variable, you have another, and you look at if there's a relationship between the two. That's Fisher's exact test. Now, how that test came about was actually through this experiment, and also everything in my slides that's red is hyperlinked. So when I release the slides after today, you can click the links and follow up for more information. But how it came to be was Fisher was in the tea room, and he was making tea, and there was a lady there, and he offered to make her tea, and he made it for her, and she took a sip, and she's like, "Oh, this tea is disgusting. It's awful. Did you put the milk first, or did you put the hot water first?" And he said, "It doesn't matter." Like, well, what does it matter? It's tea. It's all there together. And she was like, "No. I can taste the difference if you put the milk first or the hot water first. And I think if you put the milk first, it's not as good as if you put the milk last or whatnot, or maybe vice versa." And he said, "There's no way you can actually tell that this is the case." So he spoke to her husband, who was out of it. She's like, "Yeah, she always says that you have to make tea this way, and this is how I've always made tea for her. And if you could work out and design an experiment around this, that'd be great." So the next day he came, and he had 10 cups of tea arranged for her. And he said to her, 5 of them have the milk poured first, and 5 of them have the milk poured last. And I want you to drink each of those cups of tea and tell me, and they're randomly arranged, drink the cups of tea and tell me which one has milk first or milk last. And so that's Fisher's exact test in a nutshell, right? So the probability of someone correctly guessing those 10 cups of tea is incredibly low. I think it was something around 7%. And he was able to do it correctly, by the way. In previous years, when I've told this story, I've actually always forgotten the ending, and students get really upset. But that is the ending. But the purpose is the story, right? The fact that the Fisher's exact test came about through that question and answering of that experimentation. And also, subsequently, there was like some chemistry paper that looked at the composition of tea and the molecules when you pour milk first and pour milk in the glass, and they found that something to do with the heating of the milk changes the possible flavor profile as a function of that. So there is a basis to it. Excellent. So that's Fisher's exact test. Has anyone heard of students' t-test or a t-test yet? Excellent. So t-test. Fundamentally used to determine if there's a significant difference between the means of two independent groups, which is an independent samples t-test, or related groups, which is a paired samples t-test, right? Fundamentally, is there a difference between the means of these two groups, right? If they're different groups, then it's independent. If it's the same group over time, it's dependent. But that's what students' t-test is. You may have asked yourself, why is it called students' t-test? Well, the person who designed it was actually working at the Guinness Brewery factory, and he was tasked as a mathematician to work out how can you determine the quality of these batches of Guinness beer. And so he was looking at them, and he worked out the t-test. He said, well, I could use mathematically this formula which allows me to determine whether there's a significant difference in the quality of these beer batches, and that's really important. As a brewery, you want to ensure that there's no difference in between each of these batches as you're producing at scale. And so he said to his manager, he said, I really want to make sure I publish this. This has a lot of utility. And the guy said, no, I don't want you to publish it at all, because we don't want to give it away that this is how we're determining the quality of beer. And so he published it anyways, but he didn't publish it under his name. He published it under the pseudonym of Student. So that's why it's called Student's T-Test. So that was his pseudonym. His name was William Steele Gasset. So what I'm trying to articulate here, hopefully, is that we have these terms, Fisher's exact test, Student's t-test. You have the definitions here, but there are real stories underpinning why they are the way they are. And these are just two of many stories across statistics as to how the test sort of came about. So there's a real core practical application of statistics. Okay, so I said to you that critical thinking is one of the key elements of statistics, and it allows you to dissect phrases such as this. For example, 46% of people think statistics isn't useful. So what questions would you be asking to assess this statement further? Does anyone have any examples of what sort of questions you could ask to probe this statement further? Yeah.
What do you think statistics are used for?
Yeah. What do you think statistics are used for? Yeah, certainly. Yeah. What's your definition of useful, and what is it used for? What do you find useful? Yeah. Excellent. Any other questions you'd ask?
Or the other 54% thinking?
Yeah. Are they saying it is useful? Are they saying they don't care? Like, what are they thinking? Excellent. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. So what was the sample? And like, how many people were in the sample? Was it everyone in this room? Was it everyone in the University of Canberra? Was it across Australia? Were there 1 million people? Were there 5 people sampled? Excellent. Any other questions? Yeah.
What has their experience with maths been?
Yeah, what has their experience with math been? Yeah, excellent. Is the perception of usefulness tied to their enjoyment of maths, perhaps? Yeah, excellent. Any other questions you'd ask? Yeah, what was the purpose of the study? Excellent. What was the purpose of the study? What was the inclusion-exclusion criteria of the people in the study? Right? And it comes back to sampling. But were people excluded if they were over a certain age, under a certain age, from different background? What are the implications that have? And as with anything, when it comes to something that's reported in the news, how generalized were the findings, right? Are those findings generalized? Yeah.
Who was doing the study? Because they want to be very based on, especially if it's from a private.
Yeah. Excellent, yeah. Yeah. Who was doing the study? And often in research, we have a section called contributions of funding, and you have to declare all the sources of funding that were provided to you for that reason. So spot on. Exactly. So was it? Well, it's 46% of people think statistics isn't useful. I mean, yes. If at face value it's 54%, that's not bad. But these are the critical questions, right? It's looking beyond the number itself and saying, well, once you ask all these critical questions, then what does this number mean? And does it mean what we think it means, right? And if you were satisfied with all of these questions and they had the sample that was large enough and it was representative, then and they've defined or operationalized useful in a meaningful way, then what does that actual finding mean? That's sort of the thinking you need to be applying to each of the research papers that you're investigating. So here's another example that came fortuitously. I was in a room where we were developing a strategy, a communication strategy for our center. I'm part of the Center for Aging Research and Translation here at the university. And they wanted to improve the outreach of all academics within this center. And so we were sitting down with the Focus Media team, and they were going around the room and they were saying, what's your elevator pitch? How would you pitch your research to someone? What would be your elevator pitch? And they were going around the room, and I should have been thinking about what my elevator pitch would be. But I had a much more interesting question, which was, how long is an elevator pitch, right? Because if you think about it, the premise of it is that you're in an elevator with someone else and you're pitching to them, right? But then how many floors would that pitch be across? Would it be across 5 floors, 10 floors? Is that 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, right? And so you could answer this question. Say if it's on the University of Canberra campus. You say, how many elevators are there here? How many floors are those? Then you get an average of those elevators, right? So that gives you a sense. You see how long it takes for each of those levels. But then there's a second element to this question. Because if you're pitching in an elevator, there has to be a second person there as well, right? So you enter the elevator, and then the second person needs to enter, and then you're starting to pitch, right? So that's another variable you need to consider. And so you'd want to do a study where you're actually monitoring the elevators and seeing how long are 2 people in an elevator for, not just 1 person. And across how many floors is that, right? And so they got around to me, and then I was explaining this thinking in a very excited manner, and they weren't as impressed. They were saying, no, it's just a general phrase about how long, say 30 seconds. But I think it goes to the heart of what a statistical background gives you, which is, when you're given a question like this, it allows you to dissect it through a critical lens, and there's a lot of ways in which it can be utilized. So that's the elevator pitch idea, and so if anyone wants to do that study, I think it's an interesting one. It would be remiss of me if I started this course and I didn't articulate the differences between frequentist and Bayesian statistics, because my role as an educator for you is not only to prepare you in terms of the learning outcomes and what you need to achieve in this degree, but also beyond. And so, as I said, the career opportunity for psychologists, many of them work in data science, many of them work in psychology, but then also have like a research component to their work. And so what I want to emphasize, and by the way, all these slides are going to be posted up online straight after the lecture. So once the video is available, I'll post all this. You have access to it. The 2 frameworks in statistics that are dominant are frequentist and Bayesian. Everything you've learned to date and will continue to learn has been frequentist statistics approach, right? And so, but both are the same. They use data to make conclusions about unknown quantities, right? So you have, say, I get all of your heights, how tall you are, and then I'll use that data to make a prediction as how tall I think the average student at University of Canberra is. Right? That could be done through a frequentist or Bayesian statistics. But in frequentist statistics, which is what you've learned, the parameter is treated as a single fixed but unknown true value. So often we're like, there's a true population mean or a true population average that we're trying to get, and then we're using all these sort of samples to get a sense of what that could be and extrapolating from that sample. That's really at the heart of frequency statistics. So the data are treated as random because they could vary if you repeated the study with a new sample. So I do a study of you guys, and then someone else do a study in, like as a lecturer in their class, we get slightly different numbers. I get 155 centimeters, they get 158 centimeters. And we say, oh, well, look, that's just really a function of the sampling. So that's the uncertainty in the estimate is quantified by variability in the estimator across repeated sampling. So this is where you may have heard standard errors, p-values, confidence intervals come from. So the 95% confidence interval, what that actually means is if we repeated this sampling procedure over and over again, say 100 times, and calculated the confidence interval in each of those 100 times, 95% of those intervals would contain what we would term the true parameter value. So you sample 100 times, 95 of those confidence intervals, hey Conan, contains the true parameter value. It's a bit sort of convoluted, right? And this is really a difficulty that students have when they're trying to wrap their head around frequency statistics, is trying to understand, well, what did that actually mean? And then once you get around it, it sort of makes a little bit more sense, and we'll progress through it throughout this course. But Bayesian statistics is where the parameter is treated as unknown and our uncertainty about it is represented with the probability distribution. So instead we say, hey, look, there's likely, it's not one true value, there's actually a range of heights that it could fit within. And the important thing is we start with what is our prior knowledge of this information, right? And then we combine that with the data, the likelihood of the observed data, to obtain what we call the posterior. All this terminology sounds really complex, right? So as with everything, let me tell you a story as to how it sort of came to be. So how Thomas Bayes came up with Bayesian statistics was he did a thought experiment, which I'm going to do with you guys today, which is he closed his eyes and he got a billiard ball, right, like the white cue ball, and he said, if I throw it behind my back and I allowed it to land on the billiard table behind me, say it was to land somewhere, right, somewhere on the billiard table, and then I would subsequently throw red balls after that, and my assistant would tell me whether it's on the left of where my billiard ball landed or the right, or if it's in line. And from that, he determined he could work out pretty much the position of that white cue ball. And let me give you the extreme version as an example. So imagine I throw it behind my back. I don't know where it is, but imagine it was to land all the way here on the left side of the billiards table. That's represented by that yellow line, right? And then I throw a red ball, and I say, where does it land? Oh, to the right of your cue ball. I said, okay, let me throw another one. Oh, it landed to the right of your cue ball. So in this first example, I've thrown 3 red balls, and the answer's been right. So that's the information I have. And then I say, okay, well, let me throw some more balls. So I'll throw 7 more balls. So I throw 7 more balls, that's right, and it keeps going there. And then I say, okay, let me throw another like 90 balls on this billiard table. And most of them say right. If I get all of that evidence, as it progresses, I get more and more certain that that billiard table is somewhere in the far left of the table, because pretty much every ball is landed right. And what I want to show you is that in here, what's being represented is we have the yellow line, which is the cue ball, and the red is our predicted line based on the data we've gathered, right? So we throw the 3 balls, we get a prediction, and you can see with every subsequent additional data we get more and more precision as to where that cue ball could be, right? And this is fundamentally what Bayesian statistics allows you to do. Frequency statistics is sort of a blank slate. Okay, let's just see where the cue ball is based on the data we have. Bayesian statistics allows you to actually include the data that we've had in previous models in your predictions. And so it allows you to incorporate that prior knowledge. That's really the core of Bayesian statistics that I want you to take away from today. And so let's do this example with sort of a more realistic or less extreme plausible scenario, where you throw the cue ball and the cue ball is somewhere in the middle here, right? And then, so here is the possible distributions of values that you see from your data that you've plotted. This gray line is your prior knowledge. You say, well, it could be possible that it could be really anywhere. There's no real distributions there. Now, what I want you to see is that this previous information becomes your prior knowledge for the next model. and the next guess, right? And then and this is what your predicted is based on the data you've gathered. This then becomes your prior knowledge for the next one, and then based on the prediction that's there. And so that philosophy of we have prior knowledge that goes into the model, we collect some data, and then we see what the outcome is, and we get the posterior is the premise of Bayesian statistics and the difference between Bayesian and frequentist statistics. So here is an example from my research that actually shows what I used this Bayesian framework for was to say, well, how long does it take for people to get a dementia diagnosis? And typically people would use a frequentist framework and they say, okay, here's my sample of people. I'm going to try to predict how long it takes for people to get a diagnosis from this. But what I did was I said, before I do that, let me actually look into research and see how many studies have conducted something similar. And what have their answers been? Some took 3 years, some took 6 years, some took 5 years. And so I was able to put all of that information into these blue lines, right? And that's the priors that we see there. And from there, I was able to predict the time to diagnosis, right? So here's just a real world example of Bayesian statistics in action. The main takeaway I want you to remember is Bayesian allows you to incorporate that prior knowledge into the models, whereas you can't do that in frequentist. Frequentist is just blank slate, you do your analyses as is. Any questions about that? No? That's probably the last time you'll hear about Bayesian statistics in your degree, unless you do honors, and you do honors with me. So if that sounds interesting, we'll do some more Bayesian together then. But otherwise, if you look into, there's this great book called The Theory of Bayesian Statistics or something about like, it goes into the stories behind how Bayesian statistics came to be, and or the theory that would never die. That's what it was called, theory that would never die. And it shows how there's been that dichotomy towards frequentist and Bayesian statistics over the years. And why Bayesian statistics keeps emerging is because it just constantly works. Whenever they have to make a prediction, when they use a Bayesian framework, it just worked better than the frequentist framework. And so an example of that is the Enigma code. If anyone knows of Alan Turing, he was sort of a person who used Bayesian statistics there to predict where submarines would be, and using those codes as a function there. So it's got a lot of utility, a lot of power, but that's the extent of what you'll hear about Bayesian in this course. So that's it. The rest will be through a frequentist framework, but it's important to know that there's other methods. Okay, the rest of this half of the lecture will be through the structure of the unit, so how it looks and what it includes. So this first lecture is survey research, and then we have survey design, descriptives and graphing, correlation, exploratory factor analysis. We'll cover psychometrics, multiple linear regressions, power and effect sizes, and then we'll have summary and conclusions. So that's really the overview of what the course will look like for the semester. So what I want to do is take you to the Canvas page. You'll have your laptop, so please log on if you have it there already. So we'll pop into the Canvas site and you can see what it looks like. So let me minimize that. Pop it here. So this is your Canvas site. There should be view as student. Excellent. So that's the Canvas site. And if you've had me before, you know how this sort of runs in terms of where content is and how it's found. It's pretty much the same as in Foundations in first year. All the material will be made available here in Hyperlinked and progressively made available as it's there. Apart from this lecture, every subsequent lecture will have the lecture slides available online in conjunction with how the lectures are, because those lectures will be recorded. Why are the lectures sort of recorded? Well, this is sort of a dying art form. Right? The idea of actually speaking in a lecture for 2 hours and having students sort of retain that information, people acknowledge that it's not like the greatest teaching practice, and that there are better models out there. And so what I'll be doing is I'll be doing pre-recorded videos, and I'll be posting them up online pretty much as I record them. So my goal is to record them every Friday is the goal, and to post it up before the following week. But at the latest, they'll be up there prior to the Tuesday of when they're scheduled, which is today. So it may be Monday, but essentially, if you log on to Canvas site and you see that these are hyperlinked, just like these links here, then you know, okay, so then the content's available, and you'll link in there. The week one will include the Gen AI lectures that I discussed earlier, but as I mentioned, if you go into my website, they'll be there as well under teaching. And so those are the slides, and those are all the materials for generative AI. Excellent. That's pretty much everything I needed to show you for the Canvas side. And everything I discussed is there. So like the unit schedule I'm about to cover, that's accessible here. Assessments are accessible here. Pretty much the home page has everything like that you need. The discussion forum is here. So it's all here on that home page. So this is what the unit looks like. Those are the lectures that are there across the weeks. This semester is the first semester we've shifted the model of teaching. That's why we're starting later in the year than you have previously. And also the break is in week 9. So we have sort of a heavy front load of the semester and then sort of a lighter end. But I think that works quite well because that's where you've got the 2 final assessments for the unit. So there's 3 assessments for this unit. The first one is a data collection assessment, which is worth 10%. That report's worth 40%. And the final exam is worth 50%. Why are there only 3 assessments? Because that's what I'm bound by in the assessment policy. There's been a change in the assessment policy as of last year, which is that all units can only have a maximum of 3 to 4 assessment pieces, and so that's have been allocated there. And so I'll walk you through what those assessments are in more detail in a moment, but for now, that's the structure. And then the main thing I want you to see as well is the tutorials are in every other week. So tutorials week 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 11 as well. So there's no tutorials this week, so please don't turn up. And those tutorials are every other week because they're longer. They're 2 hours in length. So that's why that's the case. And also I find that with the tutorials of this course, it's sort of useful if you've reviewed the lecture material. It really adds to the tutorial. Because you'll understand the application. But fundamentally, the tutorials are the practical application of the skills. So even if you don't fully understand the lecture content in a particular week, that won't stop you from doing the tutorial, which is how do I physically do this in the statistical software we're using, which is Jamovi. So that's why literally the first tutorial is introducing you to Jamovi, how to use it effectively, and then building on from there in terms of doing some analyses. Cool. Any questions so far? All good? All right. Easy. Jamovi. So that's the statistical data analysis tool we're using. So we use Jamovi for statistical analysis, not SPSS. You would have used Jamovi in other units in the program thus far, if you've done first and second year stats. But why do we use Jamovi? Well, it's easy to use. It has a simple and intuitive interface that makes it easy for users to perform statistical analyses without prior knowledge of complex syntax or programming. So you don't need to know how to code. I'll be frank with you. My use of Jamovi is tied solely to this course. I don't use Jamovi outside of teaching how to use Jamovi, and that's because I use R. But the beautiful thing about Jamovi is that it's built on the back of R. So you could actually it has integration with R, so you can use it in conjunction with R. It can create code for you to copy and paste into R to be able to use it. So it's a good stepping stone for that if you're interested, but fundamentally it's point and click software. So you can find the options you need to run the analyses you need. It's accessible, so it's free, it's open source. So it can be downloaded on all your laptops for free, so you don't need to pay anything. It's fast and efficient, and it's only growing. It's got some community base that's allowing for more and more functionality of statistical tests on it. So that's Jamovi in a nutshell. So hopefully you're sold. If not, well, you'll just use it for a semester. Instructions for downloading Jamovi are on this slide, but also on Canvas. And again, if you go into the Canvas site, in that home page, you can see, if you click there, you get the instructions for downloading Jamovi, which are all there. Excellent. Yeah, there's a free textbook as well, and a user manual that'll help you get started. I think that textbook has some statistical explanations along with the use of Jamovi, so it can be useful there if you're interested. As like a complete side bonus, I really view this course is more than material, but sort of a stepping stone for you to learn and sort of develop a love for statistics. It's sort of an ambitious goal. But in part of that journey, I thought it would be useful to apply for a Data Camp classroom. This entire Data Camp thing is completely optional, but what it is, Data Camp, if you haven't heard of it, they are a company that provides really high quality courses. So they do courses on all sorts of things, including Gen AI, including how to use R, but also including like a lot of the statistics you're learning in this unit. So multiple linear regressions, correlations, many of those are there. So if you're interested in learning R or further statistics support, you've watched the lectures, you've read the material, and you're like, actually, I'd like to know a bit more, then you're welcome to use Data Camp, which gives you access to all these courses for free, or even just check it out. You just need to sign up with your uni.canberra.edu.au email address, because that's the sort of passcode to get in with that invite link, which is there in red, but also can also be found here. So if you click Data Camp here, that's the invite link, and that'll take you to sign up. Again, completely optional. I just wanted to provide you with that additional resource. So I thought it would be useful for your learning and also for your career development if you wanted to learn something and have access to that. Excellent. Okay, let's talk about assessments. So there's 3 key assessments. The data collection assessment worth 10%, the lab report worth 40%, and the final exam, which is worth 50%. So let's start with the data collection assessment, which I think is a nice assessment piece because it ties into the lab report. So the data collection assessment is what you're required to do is essentially collect data. So you'll get hands-on experience as a psychological researcher collecting and entering data. It's one of those assessments that if you follow the instructions, I mean, as with all assessments, but if you follow the instructions and you embed the data in correctly, it's very difficult not to get full marks for this, right? And I'll walk you through what that looks like. So if you go onto the Canvas page, go to Data Collection Assessment, and all the information you need is here. So the survey that's available to download is here. And so you need to collect five participant responses, one of which is suggested to be your own. So if you could fill out this survey and then enter that data, and that could be one of your 5 participants. But if you're not comfortable doing that, you can just get 5 people to fill it out, but I still recommend you go through the survey. And it covers questions like what's your age, what's your gender. Then these are a set of questions about your personality. So you rate your personality on these scales: responsible or irresponsible, cooperative or uncooperative, and it goes on for all these traits. And then you rate, this is a procrastination measure. So it rates overall, how much do you think procrastination is a problem for you on the following tasks? And you say, not at all, or a great deal on written assessments, keeping up with weekly readings, studying for tests, watching lectures, doing weekly quizzes. So it goes on. And then this last one is on perfectionism. So please rate the extent you agree or disagree with each statement. And here are a whole bunch of items about perfectionism. So I hate being less than the best at things. I get upset if I make mistakes. I'm an organized person. I always get things done on time and do well. And so you rate strongly agree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. And that's it. That's the survey, right? So there's 3 sort of core measures. Well, there's 5 core measures there: age, gender, then personality, procrastination, and perfectionism. So that's the survey. And then if you go onto the data collection guidelines. Open a new tab? Maybe, yeah. The data collection guidelines gives you a detailed explanation of how you're meant to collect that data. So it tells you to approach people in daylight, by the way, if you're doing it in person. Try not to, hey, doing this for my unit. Try to make sure it's a daylight. You can do it in person data, or you can do it online or an email data collection, which is fine as well. So those are just the two options to allow for each of the different modes of delivery. And then it explains what you need to do for in-person and for email, and including what the inclusion-exclusion criteria is for the study. So read all of this in detail. It's really, really important because all of this information feeds into your methods and data for the lab report that you're going to be writing, right? So you're going to collect the data, you're going to know the method for collecting that data, and that's going to feed into the method section of the lab report. Excellent. So that's that. And then when you have your data, here's the data file template. You can't view it because you need to open it in Jamovi. But it's essentially a column for each of those measures we saw on the survey. And then the final bit of it is the data entry guidelines, which tells you in detail how you need to put that data into the Jamovi file, including your student ID. Give the participants an ID number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 once you've collected the 5, and then each of these measures that you've collected and how to sort of code that into the thing. So all the information is there, you code it in there, you submit it. If you're able to follow that and submit it, I don't see how you wouldn't get the full 10% and 10 marks. And as you can see, here's the rubric. If you name the data file correctly based on what's information in the what's written in the instructions, you enter participant IDs, variable in cases, accuracy of the data file. It's really if there's any errors in that data set, that's where you lose the points, or any errors in the naming of it. I might just close the door. Excellent. So that's everything about that's the data collection assessment, and that is due in Monday of week 3, I believe. And really, there's nothing stopping you from doing that today or tomorrow and just getting it done with that. Any questions at all? Why is it due Monday of week 3? It allows time for it to be marked, it allows time for it to be put together, but also it's part of the assessment policy is that you have an assessment that's marked and returned to you prior to census day, which is the end of week 4. So that's why it's there, because it's often people do automated assessments, but I thought this was a really nice way of getting you engaged with the lab report early and feeding into it. Yeah. Is it Mark or Andrew? Sorry, Andrew. Yeah, go. Yeah.
Are you happy for us to collaborate?
Oh, to get each other? Yeah.
For non-class.
The idea is non-class people. Yeah. So, and the reason for that is the assignment may not work effectively. Like in terms of you'll be analyzing this stuff. And so the problem with all of you collaborating with one another is the fact that you'll have duplicate data across the data set. And then that'll just mess up the answers. And also, fill it out once. More of it is about data collection than data filling. So just fill it out once for yourself and then find 4 others. Yeah, sorry. Just those 2 that were there. I think it says it on the data collection guidelines. It has to be over 18. So someone who is over 18 and has not completed the survey before this year. So ensuring that, they haven't done it before. Yeah. Yeah, friends who do, don't go to uni is fine. Yeah, that all works well. So, and so the thing is with collaborating as well, it means you just couldn't do it for yourself. So you do the survey yourself, and then you're good to go. Any other questions? No, should be a fun task. Should be straightforward. Get that done. Submit it as soon as you can. I think that's a good idea. Okay, excellent. So that is data collection assessment, and then the next thing you do is a lab report, which I'm not going to go into as much detail at this stage because much of it really won't make sense until we cover the content. So it includes exploratory factor analysis. You'll do a multiple linear regression, and you'll be able to complete the lab report progressively as you work through the course. Of course, you can't do the lab report analysis side of things or even descriptors until you have the data set. So that won't be until it's marked and returned to you and collated in that process, so week 4 onwards. There's a reading list on Canvas about the lab report. So if you go on Canvas, you'll find some of the readings related to where those measures were pulled from, which can be of use to review. So that is that with the lab report. Why do we do lab reports? Well, they're the main way we communicate our research in psychology. And if you want some good examples, you can have a look at articles published in psychology journals, particularly Q1 journals that can be checked via Schemago. So Schemago is how you, so the quartile system is journals are ranked on Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q1 being the highest quartile. And so typically journals there are higher quality, but it's not always the case, but it's a good guide to help you with that. This is a good place to talk about GenAI because this is the assessment where GenAI's use is permitted. So I encourage you to use GenAI to search for material, to be able to identify, to be able to identify literature, to be able to help in your writing. Look, my philosophy in GenAI, and you'll understand it very clearly as to what you're able and not able to do with GenAI when you review the course that I've popped up so that, about GenAI that you can review. But fundamentally, it's two things. One is that the way in which you use GenAI, you are the person whose name goes to the work. So at the end of the day, you need to authenticate that, okay, the work here is mine and I have reviewed it thoroughly and that's what I'm submitting. So the way in which people come into issue is if they use GenAI and they don't review the work. And so if you're reviewing the work, you're happy to use GenAI. I'm happy for you to use GenAI in ways that allow you to complete this assessment task. The second way, however, in addition to verifying the output, which is sort of a foundation, and an example of this as to how it's not even, it will be done more, but how it wasn't, was Deloitte, where it is a major company that was commissioned to do a report for the Australian government. And they submitted that report to the Australian government. It was end of last year. And it had all these fabricated references in it. And so they didn't say that they used GenAI, but it was very clear that they used GenAI. And so the government said, hey, what's all this? We've tried to look up these research papers, we can't find them anywhere, what's going on? And they said, oh, sorry, yeah, we did use GenAI to produce this thing. And it was a massive hit to their reputation. I'm not clear what happened afterwards in Deloitte, but I doubt the person's still working there who produced that report. And of course, all the other companies just threw them under the bus immediately. Like Ernst & Young were just like, we would never do that. We have such high ethical standards that's so inappropriate. But I think it is a good lesson, though, is the fact that I want to help you use GenAI ethically, right? So if you're asking a question of should I be using it in this way? Ask yourself, is that an ethical use of AI? So for example, should you be uploading the participant data set into AI tools? No. Why? Because on the participant information sheet, it doesn't have anything saying that they consent to using their data for AI. So that is probably the only limitation in the data report. However, there's ways around this. You don't need to upload your data file to be able to get AI to help you. You could say, hey, I have a data file that has information on age and gender and perfectionism, procrastination, and here are the items of the survey. Can you help me with the structure of what should this look like? So you can use it without actually compromising the ethics of the data file. So I just want you to use it in those ways. And if you review the course, it gives you a good overview of all that information. Cool. Any questions about that? Yeah. If at any time you are unsure, just ask me. Just put it into the discussion forums, right? If you go into the discussion forums there, you'll see someone already asked a question in the discussion forums, and I already answered because that's how on it. They said, hey, can you post the lecture slides? And I said, sorry, I'm still working on the lecture slides, so I can't. But all future lectures will have. But I'm very active on these discussion forums. Please make sure that you use them when you have questions, and they can go on here, right? So pop them in. So anything about the lab report can go in here, final exams here, data collection assessment. And it's really helpful if you pop the questions in the relevant chats, just so people who have questions, they can filter through and find them easily. Excellent. So yeah, all other slides will be posted with the lecture videos. That is the lab report. That's GenAI. Any questions about any of that? No? Does that make sense? No? Cool. And then the last one is the final exam. So the final exam sets knowledge of concepts covered in the tutorial. Include practical knowledge, requires some use of Jamovi. It's 2 hours in duration. Why is there a final exam in this unit? Well, it'll become more apparent as you watch the GenAI videos as well. But really, the there's twofold. I want you to use GenAI as part of the course, but I also need to ensure that I can assess your learning and that you've learned stuff without the use of GenAI. And what I mean by without the use of GenAI, I mean that you're not relying on GenAI to understand the core competencies of the learning outcomes of this unit. And so this final exam really touches the core competencies of, do you understand multiple linear regression? Do you understand exploratory factor analysis? Do you understand how to conduct these analyses? And it may seem daunting at this stage, but remember, we've got, in 12 weeks, you'll have mastered the material that leads into this final exam. And so it will require some use of Jamovi. So please engage meaningfully with Jamovi, have a play, and particularly ask questions in the tutorials, because that's where we'll be focusing on your Jamovi competency and skills to be able to use it to answer the statistical questions. So there is a practice final exam that's written up there. It's not on all the content. I've just focused on sort of week 7, 8, and 9, which are in some ways like the lecture material. Progressively, I would say, gets heavier as you go through the semester. So we start off sort of light I guess light in some ways, and then sort of increase that. And that's because we sort of build your competency. So we'll start by talking about things you may already know, but then it will build on that. Just because I want to ensure everyone's on the same foundational stage, and then I build your understanding together. And so what that means is I thought it would be useful to just assess some of those later lectures. 7, 8, 9 are some of the last lectures, lecture 10 being the summary lecture. So 7, 8, 9 are the last related to multiple linear regression, and also the tutorial as well. So the setting for the practice exam, you can complete it up to 3 times. And after each attempt, you can check which questions you got correct, as well as which ones you need to improve. And then on your 3rd and final attempt, the correct answers are presented. So this assessment's not graded, it's just a set of practice questions. And the reason why it's there is to sort of just help you with your exam preparation, to help with that practice that's there. Excellent. So if you have any questions about the unit or assessment, post them in the discussion forum or on campus. Does anyone have a question there? Yeah, go for it, please. It'll be proctored, yeah. So similar to that final exam in Foundations, if you've done proctoring before. If not, I'll post instructions on how to do that proctoring system. Yeah. Yeah. So it'll cover everything from this week all the way to the end. Yeah. Cool. Excellent. All right. And saying that, have a break for like 7 or 8 minutes. We'll rejoin in 10:35. Yeah. So have a bit of a break. Stretch your legs, and I'll kick it off then. Which one? The Cool. Good to know. Good to know. Yeah, it's been all over the place with the scheduling, so but that makes sense. Sorry. Yeah.
I got what 5 minutes of the bloody traffic lights on there
All
and
right.
it takes 15 minutes to get here and I got stuck. Oh, sorry, to get to John Myers. That was the average.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it can be painful.
There are shopping amount of lights here and
Yeah, there are a lot. There are a lot. Riding a bike is a good way around that. Oh no, okay. Yeah, fair enough. Well, soon it'll be very cold. So.
I used to and they noted it.
Oh, did they?
They put it because of the
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm sure it'll come back. I'm sure it's gonna be revived in 2 years.
Is also on the back. See, that's just like the other side of the.
The ANU part is like,
Yeah.
Well, that did mention that's because of public service. Apparently, it was like and would buy all of them.
my son drives his flat granite and he scooters.
I don't want to actually got to, but then I noted it and also I was looking at it, my sister's the store, and I was like, can you can borrow my car?
Yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah. So they're. Yeah, 100%. No, that's. Are you on the campus? Yeah, cool. So in real time, say tutorial like around 5:30, 7:30. Yeah. So if you flip into so you have sort of unenroll into yeah. On campus, you enroll into real time, and that's Thursday night. That's so you go into the 5:30 to 7:30. Thursday. Yeah. No worries. And that's literally the idea. Like it's scheduled in that way to allow for people who work, during the week. So. Faculty health. Yeah.
Yeah, I always get because of the name of the course, like science of psychology.
Oh yeah, fair. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, it does. Understandable.
Yeah.
We can't ask you to do it. Can we?
Maybe one person could.
Oh,
We have a few minutes after class, but I have
That's a good idea. But I feel like prepared it. I may not be able to. Yeah. All right. Let's get going. That's the second half of the lecture. Oh yeah. Do you know I like to do class photos in the middle of the thing for the first lecture? So I'm going to do that again. And then you can go back to foundations and see how much you've aged over the time. So, so if it's okay, if you don't want to be in the class photo, completely fine. I'll do it over here. Feel free to move to the side, or you can, walk out. All right. Let's see if I can get everyone in. All right. Excellent. 1, 2, 3. They decided psychology. Hold on, guys. Thank you. You can look back at that. I'll put those into the slide like I do for the other one as well. So you'll see that on this slide when it's on Canvas. Okay. So this is with the last little bit we're going to cover this. Give you an overview, a bit of a taste of what's to come. So what are we going to cover? Types of research, the purpose of research, and writing a research question and hypothesis. So that's really the core points we're going to cover. It's important to sort of understand the framework in which we're going to be operating in, which is positivism. Positivism is a philosophical approach that emphasizes the scientific method and the use of empirical evidence as the basis of knowledge and understanding of the world. Fundamentally, it just asserts that all knowledge, including human behavior and society, can be studied objectively and reduced to mathematical and natural laws. So it's saying pretty much everything in the world can be studied mathematically and be measured. So the assumptions of it is that the world is made up of phenomena that has measurable properties. Psychological phenomena can be measured, recorded, and analyzed. And then interpretation of analysis lead to actual valid insights about how people think, feel, and behave. There are other perspectives out there. So positivism is not the only way around the world. Not everyone thinks that every phenomenon is measurable and allows you to interpret. There's the social postmodernism, which is also called social constructivist perspective, which assumes that there is no objective truth. We can come up with theories as ways of interpreting the world, but because they are not measurable, we can't compare them. So why am I touching on these points? Well, just because for this course, most survey research is based on positivism, which is the perspective or lens used in this course. So every time we're talking about measures, we're talking through the lens of, look, everything can be measured. So how can we do it to understand the truth of the world, the objective truth that's there? Excellent. So that's positivism. It's closely tied to the scientific method, which allows you observe a phenomena, you see something happens, you ask questions, you make an hypothesis, you conduct an experiment, collect your data, analyze the data, interpret and conclude, and apply findings. And the great example of this that I love is this case of the disappearing teaspoons. You would have done with me in Foundations. As a refresher, it's where people use the scientific method to ask the question, where do all the teaspoons go in a staff tea room, essentially? And so they use the scientific method they observe the teaspoons are gone, they ask the question, where did they go? They made a hypothesis, they conducted their experiments, and they applied it. What I also love about the way these assessments are designed in this unit is the fact that you're actually going to be working through this entire process, including the collecting and analyzing of data through the data collection assessment and the lab report. And so you get a chance to work through each of those steps of the scientific method. So the types of research that are there are three main types of research methods. They include experimental, the quasi-experimental, and non-experimental. We're going to go into them in a bit more detail now. So we're going to use these different methods to answer the same question. Because in research, when you have a question, for example, does eating chocolate improve happiness? We don't just say yes, of course. We say, it may, and how can we investigate this in a way that allows us to determine what the answer could be? And there's different ways of investigating it, each with their pros and cons in terms of time intensity and ability to allow us to infer causality. So let's start with experimental. An experimental design is a random assignment to groups. So what that would mean is I randomly assign everyone in this room. Some of them will be in a group that eats chocolate. Actually, I'll have three groups. Some will eat chocolate. Some will eat something that tastes like chocolate but isn't chocolate. It's like a placebo. And then some won't have any chocolate. I'll randomly assign you, and then I'll give you a measure on your happiness. And I'll see what was the relationship between your eating of chocolate and happiness. So you get really tight control over these extraneous variables. You could say, typically we say in research, well, how do you know that the relationship between eating chocolate and happiness wasn't related to those people were just happier in general at baseline? You say, well, we randomly allocated them to those groups. So that sort of controls all those extraneous variables. But as you can imagine, that's actually quite difficult to conduct, right? It's costly, time-consuming, and it's also intensive. I sort of need you in there in a room to sort of investigate it. So that means it's not ecologically valid. What does that mean, ecologically valid? It means that sometimes we study stuff in science within the confines of the laboratory. We get really precise observation of, oh, look, this is how this phenomena is operating. And then we let that person go. And then we observe it. And we realize, actually, it's not how we thought it was at all, because it's not in the natural environment. It's completely different. Maybe there's other factors at play. So ecological validity is essentially to have something that is ecologically valid. It means that you're testing someone in their natural environment, right? If I do an experiment on you now, it's not necessarily in your natural environment. You need to be just doing your day-to-day actions, right? And it also may not be ethical, right? So for example, okay, eating chocolate is fine. But say, for example, I want to know if I didn't know the results of smoking and lung cancer. And so I say, well, I want to do a randomized control trial. Get some people who I give them cigarettes and others receive and others that don't. That's not necessarily ethical, particularly given what we know about smoking and lung cancer. And so for many drugs, many treatments, it just may not be ethical to randomize things. It works the other way as well, in terms of experimental design. For example, if there is something that you know will give someone a benefit, it may not be ethical to do a random allocation because some people get a benefit and others may not. And so this is a hard line, especially with new drug therapies that emerge in diseases about experimental research, but it's something to consider. The next stage is quasi-experimental. And this is where it's like experimental, but I don't randomly allocate, right? I just use naturally occurring groups. So I say, how many people here eat chocolate? How many people don't eat chocolate? Okay, those are my groups. Now let me use that and compare you on the happiness scale. So assignment of groups is non-random, and you get some control over extraneous variables. So for example, I could say, okay, if I've got someone who's 30 who eats chocolate, let me find someone who doesn't eat chocolate who's 30 as well, right? So I look within the groups and I sort of match participants in age or sex. And so it has more ecological validity because I'm not putting you into a certain confined environment. You're in your natural habitat. And you have less control over extraneous variables. So you can see it as sort of a continuum. We have experimental design where you have lots of control over extraneous variable. It's less ecologically valid, but it takes a lot of effort. And then quasi-experimental is these components here. So it has ecological validity. You have less control because it uses naturally occurring groups. And the last is non-experimental research. No manipulations are present at all. You just measure things as they are. So it's more descriptive research questions. And so it can be fast and really cheap. You can think of any sort of marketing research of how many people take this product or eat this product is there. And so you can look at relationships between variables but cannot determine causality. So you'd be measuring for every single one of you. I'd say, well, how much chocolate do you eat? And then here's your happiness. You wouldn't actually administer the happiness survey as well. You just measure things that they were. So you say, how happy would they report themselves to be? And then you'd see what the relationship is between those variables. So when you're thinking non-experimental, think research that's descriptive, where you're trying to understand the nature of behavior as a descriptive item. So, for example, how many people drive to work, how many people drive to university or catch a bus to university or walk to university. That's all non-experimental. It's sort of descriptive. Now, all research types can include surveys, but if the variable is manipulated, then it's experimental. So that's the key real takeaway. If you can see that a variable is being manipulated, then you know it's an experimental research. Okay, let's see if you understand those concepts. So let's do some practice questions. So I want to know if drinking caffeine before a lecture affects recall. I compare study habits of university students who regularly use caffeine with uni students who do not regularly use caffeine. This research is what? Experimental, quasi-experimental, non-experimental? What do you think? And why? Yeah.
Quasi-experimental.
Yeah, why?
You've got two groups that have been selected, and your can't remember the rest.
No, you got, so it is quasi-experimental, and because you're using naturally occurring groups, right? You're not like randomly allocating them. So well done. Yeah, so it's quasi-experimental. You're just looking at the naturally occurring groups, which are people who are using caffeine and who do not. So there's no random allocation that's occurring, which is why when it would be experimental. Excellent. A researcher surveys Australian community attitudes to eating non-traditional meats. This research is experimental, quasi-experimental, non-experimental. Yeah. Yeah, why? Yeah, using the survey, and you could use surveys in the other designs as well, but it's more descriptive. There's no groups allocation, so there's no random allocation of groups, and there's no naturally occurring groups. You're just seeing broad trends within a overall population. So excellent. So that's non-experimental. The last one: a researcher randomly allocates participants to a morning or evening exercise routine, then compares the sleep patterns of the two groups. Research is experimental, quasi-experimental. Sorry? Experimental why? Yeah. Yeah, excellent. So it is experimental because there's a random allocation of participants, right? Also, the other two questions were the other two options. So I gave you an example for all three. So that's another. Yeah, that's not the logic I want you to use in these. So what I want you to think about is what is the effect of pet ownership on happiness? So I want you to think about a way to design and test this research question using each type of research, using non-experimental, quasi-experimental, experimental. Realizing you can use surveys in each of those, but just in terms of the design of how you operate. And I think that'll help drive home what the differences are between them. So think about those features and apply those. Okay, so what is the survey? I talked about the survey, saying that you can measure things with the survey, but what really is it? We define it as a standardized stimulus. So when you, thank you, appreciate it. When you do your survey administration to your 4 other participants, or 5 if you don't want to do it yourself, then what you'll notice is that each of them will do the exact same survey. They'll be asked the exact same questions, they'll do it in exactly the same way, but they'll have different responses. Right? So it's standardized in the sense that every single person gets the exact same set of questions. A survey is a measuring instrument, right? So it's measuring something. All those questions on your survey are measuring something. You have them grouped nicely to measure personality, procrastination, and perfectionism. So what's the history of surveys? Well, very early surveys collected not much more than demographic information. They wanted to know people's age and sex. And early survey research began in the 1920s. And then modern scientific survey research methods became widely available in the 1980s. This is for many reasons, but one key one is the advent of computers and technology, and progressively emails, which allowed surveys to be distributed en masse and on scale. So a lot of changes that occurred with computing. So what are some examples of survey-based research? Well, for demographics, when we're trying to understand that, we use census data. And so anytime you're trying to understand, is this data that we've collected representative of people of this population. You can look at the census data to get a sense of that. Epidemiology, which is health surveys, you could use it for. Marketing to determine customer satisfaction, which is used all the time when you're shopping at different supermarkets, or if you're buying clothes, whatnot. You always have customer satisfaction, especially if you buy stuff online. You should get an email that says how was your experience. Politics, it's used by polls all the time, right? Psychology for attitudes, emotions, sociology for social trends. So surveys are used in a whole bunch of different contexts. These are only just a few of those contexts that are there. So what can we measure? Well, fundamentally, attitudes, behaviors, emotions, satisfaction, and these are really powerful tools to measure, because then we can get a sense of predictive ability, right? We can maybe even, if we're measuring things like satisfaction, attitudes, maybe we can start predicting behaviors as a function of all of that. So there's a relationship between them. Survey research characteristics, it's used widely in social sciences. It's standardized and systematic, follows specific procedures based on science and the scientific method. It's replicable, which means other researchers are likely to get similar results if following the same method. And the types of survey research are, it's administered via interview or questionnaires, right? So it is possible to do it via interview, but again, for it to be standardized, you actually need people get trained really carefully to make sure that they're asking questions in the same way to each of the participants, that when a participant sort of acts in a way different to others, the response allows for that standardization to occur. It's a really critical part of research, because if the survey stimulus is not standardized, the issue is that you cannot say, well, is the result that we see, the differences between these groups, for example, is it because of the differences that are there? Or is it just because of how you've administered the survey, the differences between different people? Maybe all of the people here are administering the survey in different ways, and it contributes to the differences we're seeing in the groups that we're interested in. So standardization is really, really important in that context. The data is often quantitative, but it can be qualitative. You can gather qualitative evidence and analyze it. That's a whole other course, but there's a way to analyze that data through thematic analysis. And impartial sampling. So you selected from a target population without preference, so it's representative and it's ecologically valid. So what that means is you can get real world samples. You're testing people in their natural environment, and you're able to assess that. So what are the purposes of survey research? Well, there's two broad purposes. It's information gathering, so that's like you're exploring a phenomena or you're describing a phenomena within a population. And then the second is theory testing and building. You're trying to explain why something happens, or you're trying to predict a behavior, or predicting that something would happen in the future. So an exploratory, we'll go through each of these four concepts. So exploratory, descriptive, explanatory, and predictive. So exploratory, the goal is to discover and explore psychological phenomena. So an example of an exploratory factor could be, are there patterns in midlife health factors that contribute to poor brain health? You're trying to understand, what could those patterns be? What could those midlife health factors be, and those patterns between them? So you're exploring the question. Descriptive is where you're describing the phenomena. So it's pretty standard. For example, what's the average age of symptom onset for Alzheimer's disease? Or what's the average age of people studying at the University of Canberra? That's a descriptive research question, right? So exploring is when you're trying to understand about a phenomena, understand more about it, and descriptive is you're just describing the phenomena. Oh, sorry, did I skip? Yeah, explanatory. So the goal of this is to explain a phenomena by looking at the relation between patterns amongst variables. So you're looking at correlations, which we'll go into in future lectures, but you're trying to see the relationship between variables. For example, is higher central fat linked to poor brain health? This is an example of an explanatory type of question. You have some evidence about the relationship, and you're trying to investigate it further. And finally, you have predictive. You're trying to actually make accurate and useful predictions about what's going to happen next. Arguably the most complex of the four examples. So can we predict age of dementia onset using midlife health factors, right? So you can sort of build as well through the ways of knowledge acquisition to get to predictive modeling. So when you're writing a research question, sometimes we have a research question and design a study to answer that question. So other times the data exists and we write a research question that can be tested using that data. So this is often termed as primary versus secondary data. So primary data is what you're doing in this course. You're actually going, collecting that data, and then you're going to be analyzing. Secondary data analysis is if, for example, I use that data that you've collected for a course in 5 years' time. I say, hey, this is what the course of 2026 have done, and here's their data. So that's secondary data analysis, where it's already been collected and you just analyze it. So what constructs are measured in our survey? We have personality, which might measure traits like openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. We have perfectionism, which might measure organization and high standards, and then also procrastination. And yeah, that survey we've already looked at on Canvas. So when you're writing your research question for this lab report, and again, the instructions are really in detailed on those lab report files, keep in mind the data will be cross-sectional, not longitudinal. So once you've written your research question, think about whether you can sensibly answer it with the data that you'll get from the survey in terms of the design of the research. And then for writing the hypothesis, once you have a research question, it's time to write a hypothesis. What do you expect the answer to your research question will be based on the previous evidence? Yeah, good hypothesis based on research. You need to go back through the readings and see what other researchers have found. You might expect to replicate their findings and show that you've based your hypothesis on previous research by including citations in your answer. Now, I should say, when you go into the lab report, if you go home and go lab report, you have all the sort of information is here. So you have the lab report instructions, the survey, which is the same survey that you have for the survey administration task, data collection guidelines, data entry guidelines. These three documents are exactly the same as what you have in the survey collection task. The only difference that you have is you'll have data. I've said to be provided by week 5. I'll provide it as soon as I can. The data screening instructions is because, look, the reality when we have data collection with just one person is there's likely going to be some errors in either data entry or data collection. Now, when you have 150 or 60 people collecting data, it's also very likely that there's going to be errors. When there are errors in the data set in that previous assessment task, the marker for this task, I've instructed them not to correct any of them. So I want those errors to be maintained within the data set. And what you'll need to do is actually follow this document for the data screening instructions and work through each of those measures to make sure that you're addressing any errors that may be there. So there's a nice table that shows. So for example, for the procrastination measure, values should be on a scale of 1 to 5. So if you see something that's a 7, you know it's been coded incorrectly, right? So all of this is going to be within your data set. So that's all going to be part of that process. The lab report instructions has 7 very detailed pages about how you should be writing each of these sections. So it gives you a lot of guidance and support through the process. So please use this as a guide to help you with completing it, in addition to the rubric that's there on the page. And that's pretty much everything that comes with the lab report. Any questions about the lab report? I'm conscious of not going into too much detail just because there's a lot that you'll need to know the theory of prior to it.
The data set is a good way of doing this initial thing. Is that then routing or consolidated or
No, it'll be your document. Yeah. So the marker will be marking everyone's data in accordance to the rubric, and then copying it into a master data file. And then so you will see your data.
So around that, data.
Yeah, exactly. So your lab report will be the whole class stuff. Yeah, spot on. Excellent. So that is that. So these sort of instructions there in the lab report. Okay, let's do some practice questions now that you've had a bit of a distractor, to see if you retained any of that in terms of study design. So, what is the goal of this study? A researcher lives in a religious commune in order to learn about the social, psychological characteristics of cults. Is this an exploratory, descriptive, explanatory, or predictive study? Explanatory? Why is that? It could be, yeah. Yeah, so it's a hard distinction. Is it exploratory or is it explanatory? Right? So it's definitely not predictive. Right? So they're not trying to predict trends, and it's a bit more than descriptive because they're actually trying to understand what the characteristics of the cults are. And is it exploratory? Is it explanatory? The distinction is: do they know what the phenomenon is, or do they not? If they don't know, it's exploratory. If they know and they're looking at relationships between those variables, it's explanatory. So here they don't know what those variable relationships are. So it's exploratory research, right? So they're in the exploratory phase of that. But that is a tricky distinction there. So but keeping that in mind will help. A researcher measures Australian people's attitudes towards asylum seekers in Australia. What do you think? Yeah. Yeah, and why is that? Yeah. So there's no analysis between variables. You're just trying to see how the behavior is in the population. So you're just trying to describe the behavior. So descriptives are really studies that are describing something. So describing a behavior, describing a measure, and that's what we see here. Excellent. So that's descriptive. Next one. A researcher administers a happiness survey and a personality survey in order to examine the hypothesis that extroverts are happier than introverts. What's this? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Predictive,
Why is that?
because it's testing the hypothesis rather than
Yeah, so it's so you can test the hypothesis and gather information in sort of all of these. So you no, that's right, but it's part of it. So you're gathering information, you're testing hypothesis. Yeah. Yeah, so they have the measures there, extroverts and introverts, and they're trying to say, is there a difference here? So they're trying to say, well, look, based on evidence, here's what I think, and can I explain this using this data? So it's explanatory here. So that's explanatory. And this one's post-development interviews with defense personnel are used to identify risk factors for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. These risk factors are then monitored in currently deployed personnel. What is this? Is this exploratory, descriptive, explanatory, or predictive? Yeah, why? Yeah, exactly. They're using previous data. So they have on a different population using previous data, and then they're using that to predict whether it applies in this new data set, right? Or a new group of people. So that's predictive. Excellent. So again, just as a refresher, so the exploratory is where you're trying to discover or explore patterns. So you really have no idea as to what could the factors be. In descriptive, something is there and you're just trying to describe that measure or describe that research phenomena. Explanatory is when you have the measures and you're looking at the relationship between those measures. And finally, predictive is where you're actually using data to predict what's happening next, predict new behavior. Often it's done in new populations. So you collect one sample. So for example, you could collect our sample of data from our cohort for the experiment, and then we could use that to predict maybe trends in personality next year, right? So you can, if you collect that data again in subsequent years, so prediction can occur from there. Excellent. So that is that with those. So the pros and cons of survey research. The advantage is survey research can be ecologically valid. So you have access to a wide range of participants, which in some ways, you have access to a wide range, true, but getting people to do the surveys is what can be the most challenging part. You won't experience this in this course, but what I just want you to reflect on is, okay, it might be easy for you to get 4 surveys or 4 people to complete your study. Imagine if you were the person collecting the entire data set for this cohort, right? The entire 150, 160 students. So multiply that by 5, it's like 500 odd people. That takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and it's really, really challenging. So you have access to a wide range of participants, potentially large amounts of data at a relatively low cost. It's pretty economical to administer a survey, and maybe more ethical than experiments for certain topics, particularly when you can allow people to complete the survey anonymously and they can provide their genuine beliefs of something. Disadvantage, you have a lack of control So there's less internal validity because so you can't make causal conclusions because it could be due to extraneous factors. The data may be superficial. It may be difficult to like gather what you need from the data. It can be costly to obtain a representative data. So if you want representative data sets, it can cost a lot of money. Self-report data only. So for example, you'll be, when you administer a survey, say something that someone's describing their own personality traits, that's their own self-report of that personality. But you talk to their friends, you talk to their family, they may have a completely different version of their personality, but we rely on their self-reported data. But there are ways around that, and you can administer the same survey to other people about one individual. And potentially low compliance rates. Potentially it's very generous there. But you're sort of inevitably low compliance rates. People may partway complete the survey and then drop out and what to do in that case. And the guidelines here for this assessment task tells you what the threshold is for what you need to ensure. Some people may choose not to complete some, but they have to complete most of the survey. Yeah, sorry.
And I know that there's one of the parents is things they even know things that
Yeah. Yeah, it's really challenging when it comes to response rates. Of course, the ideal is 100%, right? And why is that ideal? Is because if you're sampling as best as you can to be representative of the population, and you get 100%, then the conclusions you can make from that survey are representative of the population. But if you do a survey and you only get 10% of people completing that survey, it's really difficult for any of those conclusions to hold merit because they could be skewed by the people that are completing the survey. Maybe people who are more motivated to complete, maybe people who have, for example, if I was to take a survey of a company like a gym membership company, and I look at their Google reviews, and there's maybe 2 or 3 core factors that could influence them. I'd have people who really hate the service and hate the people and want to write negative review, or you have people who are loving the service, writing positive reviews, or you have people who are prompted by the owners to write reviews and they're writing reviews. So that any Google review you see is sort of skewed in that nature. If you were to randomly sample and you have them all complete the survey, that's when you have a bit more of that representativeness. So all surveys that don't have that response rate with a correct sampling procedure will lack the representativeness of their findings. And what you'll see is that many people are happy to make conclusions on biased samples and biased data all the time. So hopefully from this course you'll have more of a critical lens of this, even when it comes to, say, reviewing where to eat your next meal. You'll look at the Google reviews and say, well, is that, how many people have responded? Is that maybe a better measure of representativeness? And maybe you're already doing some of these things. Any other question? Was there another question? No? Okay. So surveys are great, right? So overall, that's one of the key takeaways. Because of their ability to access many people in their natural environments, you get lots of data, but there are limitations as well that we need to consider, particularly in interpretation of findings, but also in terms of response rates as well. So what do you need to know? You need to know types of research from today, you know what a survey is and its general history, know the goals of research and the pros and cons of survey research. So survey research relies on the scientific paradigm that assumes a positivistic view of knowledge. So that's the phenomenon that everything is measurable in the world. Types of research, and it aligns with the scientific method. Types of research that we covered were experimental, which had the random allocation of groups, quasi-experimental, which uses naturally occurring groups, and then non-experimental, which is more descriptive of people as they are. A survey is a standardized stimulus. That's the critical part. It's standardized, so it's done the same way and it's designed to measure psychological phenomena. And modern research on surveys has been around since the 1980s. Goals of research is either you're gathering information, so it's exploratory or descriptive, or you're testing a theory, which is explanatory or predictive. Pros, it's ecologically valid, cost efficient, gets lots of data. Cons, you can get low compliance and reliance on self-report. And a con in these day and age, if you administer a survey online and you have some incentive, like $15 voucher for something, you can, and if you don't embed like a CAPTCHA, which is where people verify they're human, you get absolutely ransacked by like computer models that try to take as many of your $15 vouchers and complete the survey. I've even seen colleagues of mine who've done surveys for free, and they still get people who just ransack them. And so I don't know if it's intentional or not, but you need some sort of verification process that the person is human. And when you do it online, that sometimes can be a challenge. And so the next lecture will cover survey design, survey administration methods, survey construction, levels of measurement, biases, and sampling. But in saying that, that's it for today's lecture. So welcome to the unit. Hope you enjoy it, and I'll looking forward to knowing more of you for the rest of the semester. Enjoy your day, enjoy your week. I'll see you next week.